Thanks for joining us today. I'm here, luckily, with a really good friend of mine, Christian Schauf from Uncharted Supply Co., and I'm excited to chat today. This will be fun. So let's start, I guess, with, to explain to those people that don't know, you were on Shark Tank and maybe haven't heard that whole backstory. Why Uncharted? How did you get here, and how was the idea born?
I'm big on authenticity, and I think this is a culmination of a lot of things that have happened in my life. So for those of you guys that don't know, Uncharted Supply builds emergency products, survival kits, first aid kits, battery jump starters, pack rafts. We like to say we design products to make you the hero of your own story. So, that all comes from my background growing up at a farm, being to Iraq 39 times, doing a lot of work over there, being a outdoors person, like I'm sure most people here are, hunting, hiking, skiing, just learning how to navigate, and then slamming up against living in California and got into 2 inches of snow one day and the world stopped for 8 hours. And it kind of took me down this path of, wow, not everybody had the same upbringing I did. They didn't have the same, parents that were farmers that taught you how to do all these things. And at the same time, the world's changing, and how do you bridge that gap? Because you can't just depend on first responders to always save the day. You have to take care of yourself, your family, the people around you. And so that's kind of where it started. It was just an idea one day sitting in traffic while I was supposed to be skiing, and I wanted to solve for it, and here we are about 6 years later.
So this wasn't the beginning of your work being an entrepreneur. I want a little bit more backstory. You glazed over the idea that you were in Iraq 39 times. That was actually for business as well, and stuff grew from there. So can you tell us a little bit more backstory of your work in startups and entrepreneurship?
Sure. So I went to school at Wisconsin, Madison, and after that started as a web designer in Menominee, Wisconsin. That lasted about a year and a half. I was playing in a little band, and I just kept saying I'll stick with it until it stops growing, and it kept growing. We ended up playing in about 35 countries. We were playing at South by Southwest and got asked to go play for the troops overseas. On my second trip over there, I learned that there were 300 out of the 350 bases roughly that weren't getting entertainment, and the reason being it was too dangerous to convoy, and these bases were so small they didn't have runways. So the only way in was a helicopter, and the bands that they were bringing in had too much equipment to fit in the helicopters. So at the time, our band was in Minneapolis. I was working with Prince, with the Rembrandts, Soul Asylum, with a lot of kind of big-name guys that had really good sound engineers. We figured out how to build a speaker system that fit into a Blackhawk and allowed us to hit all these bases. So that turned into my band doing 150 shows overseas. We were named Armed Forces Entertainers of the Year, but more importantly, we figured out how to deliver other bands and provide entertainment at scale. So for about 10 years, if my band wasn't playing, I was either I'd guide the Pussycat Dolls through Iraq, which is probably not as much fun as it sounds. We did action sports. We built skate parks, and I'd take over the X Games guys and do shows. So there was a lot of experience behind kind of that whole thing, kind of surviving, planning for the day. You'd fly in somewhere, and you thought you'd be out in 2 hours, and it'd be 3 days later, and they didn't have supplies for you. So I was taking care of myself and others. As that was all going on, I also helped start a company called Crispin Cider in Minneapolis. A friend of mine, Joe Herron, was the actual founder, but I was employee number one. And we sold that to Miller Coors, I think, 4.5 years later. So a really quick exit on that, which was a really amazing experience. And then I started doing work for Harley Davidson, for GoPro, for really good lifestyle brands. So it was really weird because I had kind of survivally preparedness stuff in Iraq. I was doing startup stuff with Crispin. I was working with big brands that really know brand on that side. And it all kind of came together with Uncharted a few years later after I took a job in California, didn't like it, and led me to kind of what's next, and that was Uncharted.
So let's talk a little bit about Uncharted. There's obviously other survival companies out there, other brands out there. What do you think makes you guys unique and stand out and outperform those other companies?
So when I was previously talking about that day where I was sitting in the snowstorm, and when I got back from Colorado that next week, I was obsessed with this idea. So I started looking for, what products exist? And it was really crappy first aid kits and survival kits in like military surplus stores. And I don't think anybody would believe that those things would actually change the day. And so it really took me down a path of like, okay, what do people need? Like, how do you give somebody that isn't going to take a wilderness preparedness class or a first aid class that has never been in an emergency situation before, how do you give them the tools they need? And what it really came down to for me was reverse engineering from the time of an emergency and understanding what was happening then and how people were thinking. And so there's kind of three things that all of our products have. It's high quality gear, first of all. It has to work. You have to be able to rely on it. It's organization, so you're not digging around looking for something, knowing it's here somewhere, but you're losing precious time. And it's a trusted voice, so everything has screen printed instructions. We color coordinate stuff. I mean, I worked with special forces guys and first responders and bush pilots and doctors to really work through, like, how do we simplify step-by-step instructions? So somebody comes upon somebody with a broken leg, they can go, oh, here's a broken leg, here's the first 5 steps I have to do, and now they're in a better situation, adrenaline calms down, and they can think more clearly. So I think when you look at our products, historically it was really commodity-based. It was, these dusty bags. It was kind of like John Goodman in 10 Cloverfield Lane, where he thought he had to have a bunker because the aliens were coming, and my perspective was an emergency can be September 11th, or it can be you crash your mountain bike. And there should be a brand out there that feels like Nike, that feels like Apple, that you trust, that kind of is portrayed in the same light as brands you're comfortable with and provides the service that we do now.
So I'm going to skip ahead to a question I wanted to ask you toward the end, but you're talking about it, and I've heard you say market space, not marketplace. I know you're laughing right now. Can you give some insight to what this means for you and, in theory, how this can help other companies out there?
Yeah, so Joe Heron was the guy I started Crispin with, and he's just South African, and he swore at me more than anybody I've ever met in my life, but he was a very quotable guy, and he had a lot of these quips. Like, another one of my favorites was, how do you find a needle in a haystack? Put more needles in the haystack, and I just love the way he thinks. But he always said market space, not marketplace. When we started Crispin, you'd walk into a grocery store and there'd be 200 craft beers and there'd be one craft cider. So why build another craft beer when there's a space to make cider? I think at that point cider was like a $300 million industry in the US, and it's like, well, if we can be in the top 5 there, or if we can get 20% of that market share, that's a really good start. If you look at craft beers, it becomes much more difficult and takes a lot more resources. So, I use that with kind of everything I've done, taking a band to Iraq, probably people think about starting a band and playing Sunset Strip in LA, but there's 50 bands a night. Where there's not a lot of bands is Baghdad. So there's a lot of opportunity there to get in front of people and make a difference. And with Uncharted, I've always been in love with the outdoor industry. I used to sneak into Outdoor Retailer just to go look at products and dream of having a booth there someday. And you look at the Gore-Tex jackets, and everybody has basically the same thing with a slightly different cut and different colors. But the one thing there wasn't really was somebody talking about quality first aid and emergency preparedness, and that was kind of a way to be in that space and do something just slightly different, but still kind of within the lens of where your new customers were.
So both with Uncharted and the survival industry as a whole, what are you seeing that's new and innovative?
Beyond us, or no?
In the industry in general?
I would say this. When we started, there was nobody doing this, and to the point where when I would dig and try to find people that had done something similar in this space, whether it was first aid kits for factories or OSHA type bright jacket. I talked to everybody, and everybody said, don't do it, it won't work, we tried, nobody buys it. But when you looked at the products they were making, they were crap, and they weren't very cool. And so we tried to, we always say be the hero of your own story, and we've tried to kind of put the right spin on this and not be fear-based. And once we did that and we proved success, there was a slew of copycats. And I'm not going to name anybody or go down that path, but what I'm seeing mostly is not a lot, maybe a dozen decent-sized companies now that are following our path in this, which I guess I have to be proud of. But I think what you're seeing is higher quality gear. You're seeing people market smarter. You're seeing people be more thoughtful about what really matters, and that's kind of the direction it's going. We have a couple patents now I'm really excited about. We've won a couple really big awards for a small company at Outdoor Retailer. So I think maybe I sound cocky, but I do think we're innovating at a higher level than most, but I think you have to maintain the place you're in. So somebody asked me that question the other day, is what do you think about legacy and things like that? And whether people are buying from us or somebody else, I do think we've started a trend now in creating the space, which if the other companies are selling too and people are becoming more prepared, that was the goal in the beginning anyways. And so we have to be thankful and proud of that.
As you're talking about this, I think in general that competition breeds excellence, and I'm sure having these people, kind of chasing after you in the market makes you push to be even better. Are there certain ways or advice you would give if there's competitors in your industry, whatever you do, and how to navigate that and choose to just overcome that and be better instead of dive into the competition world?
I'm probably not the right guy to ask because I'm extremely territorial, and it feels like somebody attacking my kid. When somebody tries to rip us off, you could ask my team. I get emotional about it. But I think at the end of the day, you just have to be better at everything you do. I think Mark Cuban always said, you have to wake up like somebody's trying to take it away from you every day. And that's the reality. If you're in a competitive space and you have a good idea, copycats are going to show up. And you just have to like dot all the I's and cross all the T's. I tell my team a lot of times it always feels like an airplane kind of bouncing down the runway, and all the parts are there, and it's the little tweaks that get you in the air, right? It's the right fuel-air mixture, it's the right pitch to the rudders, it's all that stuff that will actually have you accelerate and take off. So, it's not just having these big, broad reactions. It's like, are we doing the right thing when it comes to marketing, and is it the right product fit, and is it the right branding, and is it the right messaging, and is there an audience that wants that product? If you do those things and you take care of yourself, I think you're going to be fine.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So we were talking a little bit about how this space is newer, right? Since you got into it, no one was really doing it. Rewind 2 years ago almost now, we were hit by a pandemic. This was something that had a lot of people reflecting on their own personal preparedness, large corporations reflecting on that, and this was an opportunity almost for you guys at Uncharted to capitalize on this and launch your company even into new spaces. Can you talk a little bit about what that landscape was like for you guys?
That was wild. We're a small company. Capital is always an issue. We were in the middle of fundraising at the time, and we were talking to retailers about expanding from just D2C into retail, and the pandemic hit, and a lot of people just pulled away from the table. They didn't know what was going to happen. And we had to make a decision of do we proceed and probably not have as much negotiating power now because there's less people at the table and grow during this moment, or do we just kind of latch down the hatches and kind of ride it out and see what happens. And we chose to be bold, and we ended up working with Black Oak Capital here in Salt Lake, and did a round and did everything we could to inventory ourselves. Now, at that moment, it was a little helpful, but the tides already turned from supply chains and factories shutting down and all that stuff. And I can tell you, we were having like 10x Black Friday traffic every day, and we sold everything on our website in about 2 days. If we would have had more, it would have been amazing. But there were some really cool parts. Since the beginning of our company, we included N95 air masks in all of our kits. So it was really fun to send an email out to all of our customers and say, hey guys, I know everybody's looking for masks. A reminder that you've got N95 air masks in your kit. That was really cool. I think that was one of those things that had people trust us more. It's like, wow, you guys were thinking about this ahead of time. But it's been a wild ride. We are in the preparedness business, and our whole perspective is get this stuff while you can, so when this stuff happens, you're ready, right? And human nature is you buy something when you need it. A friend of mine, Cassidy Phillips, started Trigger Point. Those are like foam rollers, and he said, you and I are in the same business, and that's prevention. He's like, my big challenge was selling people a foam roller so they could roll out their hips or whatever, so they didn't pull a hamstring or they didn't have an IT band injury. And it took a long time for him to convince people that the prevention was really critical, because once the injury happens, now you're behind the ball and it's too late. So I think that's something we always struggle with. I think that there's probably a new sense of awareness these days because of the pandemic. People have gone through supply chain issues now in a real first person kind of way. And, our hope is that translates into people being more prepared. I mean, listen, we want to have a big business, but I think if we have a big business, we achieve what our real goal is, and that's making the world a safer place. That was always the goal. So hopefully this is all helping people think about this and just make sure they're ready for whatever comes next.
As a business owner, I want to go back to something you said. You sold out of everything on your website in 2 weeks or something, a couple of days, however long you said. What do you do now if you can't keep up with the demand?
I consulted a lot of people. I talked to guys like Peter Metcalf that started Black Diamond, Dan Nordstrom that had Outdoor Research. I went to all these guys and I said, hey, I don't want to be the discount brand. I don't want to, how do we navigate this? And what we ended up doing after talking to a lot of people that we trust is collecting pre-orders, getting people in line and giving them a discount for being patient. I think it was 15% off we gave last year. And we collected a lot of money, and I think people felt good that they knew they were in line. They knew that they jumped on this earlier than just waiting another month randomly. And we just had to over-communicate with people on where supply chains were at. There were sometimes we'd send out most of the kit because we'd be missing a shovel. And during a pandemic, maybe the shovel wasn't the most important part, but give me the rest of it and send me the shovel. And so, from a margin standpoint, it hurt. But I think from just building the brand and having that communication with your customers, I think you always have to be forging ahead. You always have to be doing everything you can to grow your customer base, to increase the trust they have in you, to get your products out there, and you just can't sit on the sidelines in a moment like that. So there's a lot of creative thinking. I mean, my advice for somebody else, it'd be industry dependent, I'm sure, and how you navigate that, but I would just say lean in and figure it out. And I have this conversation with my CFO all the time. Is it margin or is it growth and market share? And I think I always go back to, let's take care of people. Let's get them something. Let's grow our presence at retail. Let's grow that, and the margin will follow later because people come to us then afterwards.
Have your CFO deal with the rest of that, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that until last January you were direct to consumer. Is that the right time frame? So since then you've gone into retailers and different platforms. Why do you think it's so important that you're available on all these different platforms?
So we've added 150-ish retailers since January, going from, we had one, which was Jan's in Park City last year. And there's a couple reasons for us that it makes sense. One, if you're in Florida and suddenly there's a hurricane 3 days out, you're not the most confident that UPS is going to deliver something shipped from Utah in 3 days. But you know that if it's at Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's or whatever, you can drive an hour over, get what you need, and get out of there. So for us, there is kind of that urgency, moment in time where it makes sense. I also think about how we buy ads and impressions and how much an impression costs. And even though margins aren't as good as retail, the foot traffic, so generally we're in a lot of little mom and pop ski shops. We're also in Bass Pro, Cabela's, Sportsman's, Scheels. We're online at Best Buy, soon to be Costco, Dick's, the big ones, right? And these guys have a ton of traffic, especially during the holidays. And for me, it's impressions. So then it comes down to really good packaging, nice monitors. The old CMO from GoPro, Todd Ballard, works for us now. So we were able to leverage GoPro's, knowledge in POP displays to build something that just really feels high quality. And, I think retail is a slow grower kind of a thing, but I think that it's also helping our direct-to-consumer because people are seeing it and then maybe they go home and research, The last piece I will say is we had about 3 months a couple years ago where we couldn't run an ad because a Facebook robot saw that we had a knife in our survival kit and they would not allow any weapons to be advertised on Facebook. So for 3 months we had our hands tied. And we did everything we could to get somebody to reverse this, and it's a long process and you just can't have those disruptions. Given how volatile social media is and Facebook and how the rules change every day and how people are getting canceled, I think for a lot of brands, a brand like ours, it's really dangerous to just put all your eggs in that basket and assume that every day it's going to be a consistent environment. So, we've got B2B stuff going on, we've got retail stuff going on, we have D2C stuff going on, and I think an omni-channel approach makes a lot of sense for us, but again, it's probably just really dependent on your product.
So I want to talk about fundraising. Obviously, you were on Shark Tank initially. That's a really unique experience, but in the sense of what's happened since then, more traditional. I know you've done some crowdfunding. Maybe give us a little preview of what has worked for you and what challenges you've faced as well.
Sure. So the first thing we did when I started, it was just me, and we started with an Indiegogo campaign, and the reality is, I didn't have a big audience online. I couldn't buy a ton of ads. I basically put my life savings into buying the first 1,000 units of our 72 survival kit, and then it's like, how do you sell this thing? So crowdfunding, when done correctly, can really be amazing, especially when you just don't have the resources. And that was the path I chose. So I think we ended up selling, I bought 1,000 units of the 72. It was all I could afford. And I told people, hey, we will guarantee deliver, by Christmas. I thought we'd probably sell 200. We sold like 1,500. So my little 800 square foot apartment in Santa Monica at the time became Santa's workshop for about 2 months trying to get these things out. And we had people buying in Russia and Latvia and all these countries where I learned a lot about customs and importing, and it was insane. But at the same time, what it did was it gave us some money to work with. It got us on the map, and then that got Shark Tank to call. We were on Shark Tank, I think, about 7 months after we'd launched. And I'll tell you what, guys, I don't know if I'd ever do a deal with a shark, but to get on that show is an incredible marketing opportunity. We use Shopify, so every time we get a sale, I get a little notification on my phone. I felt like the smartest man on earth the night that show aired, because the sales that come in from something like that are incredible. So
let's pause. Did you make a deal?
So we did. We actually ended up getting double what we were asking for on the show from Robert Herjavec. Now, I've signed an NDA not to talk about this, but
this is going to be broadcast next week.
I don't think they care anymore. I've said this so many times.
It's your
We
head.
didn't reach a deal after the show. I think what happens is once they clear the deck, they try to change the deal materially and put the screws to you. And the first thing I did when I left the show was I get them to sign a paper telling them, I was like, hey guys, we're already negotiating some investments. I want to be able to keep doing those, and keep that conversation going. So they signed a paper saying I could continue kind of negotiating with other people during our due diligence process, which became maybe one of the better moves I ever made, because I was able to leverage everybody against everybody. We ended up not doing a deal with Shark Tank because we had a deal at 5 times the valuation from a different group. And so I kind of let them know the day before the show aired. So I made sure we got on TV, and things worked out really well for us. But I guess, when you talk about Shark Tank, it's always an interesting thing for entrepreneurs. The way I looked at it was, they're on season 15 or 14 or something like that. These guys can't be managing that many businesses that well. And I think you get put into a funnel, and I think they de-risk themselves at such a level that if you lose, they're not really out anything. And then if they've got some that just take off, like Scrub Daddy and Tipsy Elves and those guys, then it's great. But you have to look at that as a marketing opportunity, and you want those sharks to like what you're doing. We put our valuation really low because I wanted them fighting over us and not telling us that it was too rich, and that worked really well. So
how long ago was that? The beginning of Uncharted?
Oh gosh, well, we launched our website November 2016. I think I think it was like June of the next year we filmed, and then it aired October, something like that.
So you're, math, 5 years?
We're about 5 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Uncharted product?
My favorite's always like the new one, right? I can tell you our best sellers are their survival kits and then our battery jump starters. We have these little battery jump starters that will start an 8-liter diesel. And it's really interesting. J.D. Power and Associates put out a study a couple years ago. 44% of new cars have battery issues within the first year or two of ownership. And the reason being, smaller batteries, smaller engines. You've got start-stop. You're in traffic. So you've got your iPad plugged in, you've got your iPhone plugged in, you've got 3 screens in your car, and your engine's turning off every time you stop in traffic, and it's just killing those little batteries. So people think they buy a new car, they don't have to worry about a new battery for a while, but those are actually real issues people face a lot. So those things do really well. The survival kits do really well. We just launched 3 new products. We launched kind of an interesting first aid kit that's waterproof and rugged. And then we launched a hip pack, which is actually I always tell people I always love the idea of a hip pack, but I've never found a hip pack that I liked that actually fit well. So we built one that's very transformable. It's got micro mollies. You can put bear spray or a water bottle or a pistol or fishing gear. And it gives us the ability to build accessories in perpetuity and kind of sell that. So you have one pack that you use. I've been loving that thing because we've got actual samples now and I've been working with it. So I'm really excited about that. But the product I'm probably most excited about right now, last winter I was out skiing up behind Park City with my dog. I ski tour a lot. And my buddy ran into him and cut his leg open. And I fortunately had one of our first aid kits and I was able to build a little tourniquet on him and get him down. But when the vet came out of surgery, he's like, he had less than 5 minutes and he would have been gone. And so we took all that and we built a dog collar that's got a small first aid kit built in. So you take your dog to a trailhead, you can slap it on and go. And given that the shelters were empty during COVID and now people are getting out into nature more than ever, the pet product industry is exploding. So what's really fun about Uncharted is you can kind of take the idea of being prepared anywhere, whether it's motorcycles or, cars or dogs or skiing or whatever. And so I really am excited to see how this product picks up, but it won Best in Show at the Outdoor Retailer. And it's just a really simple idea that makes a lot of sense. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Let's talk about that. Actually, you have some partnerships with some big companies that Uncharted is working with. How do you feel like big brand exposure is helping propel you guys forward as a company?
Yeah, so I always call it the Intel Inside thing. When you used to go buy like a Dell computer, you'd see the little Intel sticker and you knew that was like the top of the line computer. It's kind of like when you get a car and you've got Bose speakers versus the stock ones that Ford puts in, right? I want Uncharted to be that for the first aid and preparedness in whatever it is. So we have live partnerships right now with Harley-Davidson, with Yeti. We're working on a collaboration with Decked. They make these really cool drawers for your trucks. That's going to come out next month. Chrisitan Arms, which is a rifle company in Utah here. We are doing something with them at a pretty big size. And we're having conversations with a really big auto manufacturer for a new 4x4 that recently has come out. And we've kind of had ongoing conversations with Trek. And it's just kind of like going, okay, your customers are out there, they're exploring, you want to protect them, you want to provide them solutions, can we work together? Because you're not an expert in this, right? You build cars, you build bikes, but we do survival. So can we work with you to understand how that fits into your industry and into your customers and build something for you? And my hope is that creates a halo effect. So somebody might buy our little triage kit for cycling because it's a perfect fit for their bike jersey, and then they go, well, gosh, I really love that experience. I'm going to buy a survival kit or a battery jump starter. So it's exposure, it's authenticity. I always go back to those two things. And if we can do that in different industries with leaders, I think that's really a powerful way to get your message out and get some validity behind your brand.
I love it. Let's talk about failure. As an entrepreneur, I think everyone has experienced at least a little bit of failure, right? Whether that's in, the people you hire to work with or a failure as far as managing your money or products. So can you share anything specifically for you that you feel like you've failed and learned and now do better?
Man, I mean, there's millions of times. I think when you're trying to do something new and there's not a path, that you're going to take a lot of wrong turns. And, I'm always focused on waking up every day and making sure we're better than we were the day before. But there's a lot of days that doesn't happen. You mentioned hiring people. When you're starting and you're young, you hire your friends. You hire people that know you and believe you, and you can never do a buddy deal. And I've been burned a couple times heavily by people that were really close friends, whether they ended up stealing or just not doing the work, and I trusted them longer than I should. I honestly don't have an answer for how to do that better, because I think sometimes you just have what's in front of you to get started, and you have to figure it out. I would say I'm probably not the most detail-oriented guy, so setting early kind of parameters around check-ins and accountability probably would have helped me at least see those problems earlier, and I could have done that better. From the business side of things, getting ahead of forecasting, building models out, investing in the right places. There's just so many times where you put some money behind something to make it work and it just flat out doesn't. And I've tried to surround myself with people that have done this type of thing before and run these ideas past them to at least get their perspective. I really believe that it's almost like you're like a batter at a baseball game, and if you step into a plate and somebody throws a 100-mile-an-hour pitch by you, that just feels crazy. But by the 40th time it comes by you, you start to get an idea of how to respond, right? And I don't think you can ever be 100%, but the more at-bats you get, the more comfortable you get with what's coming and how to navigate it and how to jump on it. So for me, it's really been finding mentors that I can trust, that I can ask questions, that maybe don't have a vested interest besides they just want to help me and see me succeed, and kind of using them as much as I can.
You mentioned that as well when you went out of stock after the pandemic. You went to your mentors. So it's obviously something that has worked across the board on a lot of different issues for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, our board has some really awesome people on it. Brad Bonham started Walker Edison's on our board. He's been highly successful, pretty big success story here in Utah. We've got Kelly Merriman, who was head of strategic partnerships at YouTube. We've got Todd Ballard, there was a CMO at GoPro. My CFO came from DPS Skis. My head of sales came from Fairview. They make like the core power protein. They were acquired by Coke. I mean, I surround myself with people that know what they're doing way better than I do. And there's a lot of peace of mind that comes from that. Because a couple of years ago, I was the smartest guy in the room, and I don't like that feeling. I'd rather have people around me that I can trust their expertise and trust that they have a really experienced perspective on things. So I'm always trying to grow that network of people I can call, because you never know when something very specific comes up and you're like, that's the guy that's been down this path and he'll have some really good advice.
For entrepreneurs listening, both to the digital version of this and here with us today, do you have, or can you narrow it down to one piece of advice that you would give in the world of business and what you've experienced?
Gosh, one is tough. The first one that came to mind was, I always like to say, burn the ships. And that's maybe for me personally. I think if I go down a path on something, but it's not something I absolutely have to do, I might find a way out when it gets too hard. With Uncharted, I literally took my life savings and bought the first out. It was like, $373,000. I remember that moment. I'd built the prototypes, I'd built the website, and then I had to write that check. And that's a huge gamble for me. And but it also, there were a lot of times where if this was like a side project, it probably would have died. But the fact that I was fully invested made me figure it out. And I just think that's the way you have to be as an entrepreneur. You can't have a plan B. I mean, that may sound a little cavalier, but I just think you have to be hyper focused on what you're doing and finding a path forward, because there's going to be a path. It just may not be visible at first. That's a big thing for me. I think the other thing I would say is, don't make that burn the ships decision until you're just completely confident that this idea works. I think on Shark Tank, I've watched a lot of Shark Tank, but they always say, well, you're solving for a problem that doesn't exist. People get ideas around products, and because they love it, they think it's going to go big, and their friends and family tell them, yeah, it's a great idea, go for it. And it might not be a great idea. I've had a lot of ideas of things I wanted to do that when I really thought about putting my money in the line, I was like, no, that's not the right idea. But this one felt like it, and so I did it. So there's two. How's that?
It's great.
Okay.
One last question. Where can we see you guys in the near future? What do you have on the horizon for Uncharted?
I mean, probably because I've said Uncharted around your phones a bunch of times, you'll probably see ads now on your social media channels. But, we're pretty heavy online. If you look up Uncharted or 72 or any of our products, we do a lot with targeting. So you can go to our website and check that out. You can check out our social. We sell, the Cabela's right up here. We've got products there. We're trying to do a lot more events this year as our team grows. We're just trying to be everywhere we can be. But we're very accessible. Our office is up in Park City, right next to Windy Ridge Cafe in the Iron Horse District. And, the door's open. We've got a couple dogs in there, and it's kind of a little clubhouse. And it's funny, people wander in all the time. Last Christmas, we were hustling around, and this guy walked in. He said, hey, am I allowed to be here? And I said, yeah, come on in. He's like, I saw your Don't Die in the window, and I want to know what you guys are doing. And it was a guy that's become a good friend of mine now. His name's Ronnie Vanucci, and he's a drummer for the Killers. But just strolled in, bought some gear, sends me pictures of his mom with her air mask on once in a while. And it's just kind of fun having, seeing who floats in once in a while. It's really cool. We had 3 guys from SEAL Team 6 show up a few months ago. We're now working on a project with them. They had heard about us. They were in town doing something. So we're pretty open, we're pretty small, we're nimble. I think that's really important. It's just fun when people are interested in what you're doing, and maybe there's a way to work together.
All right, let's open it up to some questions. Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, thanks.
There's a microphone back in the back that he'll pass around.
Thank you for the stories.
Yeah.
As somebody who's snuck into a couple outdoor retailers, I definitely appreciate the camaraderie. What are your thoughts on marketplaces? How do you control your product on places like Amazon, Walmart, eBay, knockoffs? What's the strategy as you continue to grow and as the brand scales?
Gosh, I think it's a moving target. Amazon is tricky, right? Because there's so much scale there. I was talking to my ad buying team yesterday, and Amazon was the one group that was outbidding us on a bunch of keywords, right? And we sell on Amazon, so in a way that they're targeting words like survival kits and emergency kits and first aid kits, which is a lot of brands, but ours is in there as well, and it's very challenging. I don't know if I have the right answer for that because it feels like a moving target. It feels like it's always changing. I think on a per case basis, you just have to make sure that the deals you're making aren't totally detrimental in the long term. It's something you can get out of if it doesn't work. It's something that you can change. I mean, we're talking to guys like Costco, right? And it's just they're a very sophisticated organization that demands a lot, and you hear horror stories, and you just have to make sure you don't just see dollar signs because they're going to give you a big PO and it ends up biting you down the road. So, fortunately, I've got a great CFO, I've got a great head of sales, and those guys know how to navigate that stuff, and they think very carefully about where we go and how we do it. But man, I think that's like the $1 million question always for everybody. I think it's pretty unique to each person and each company and how you do it. From a competitive standpoint, I mean, I touched on that a little bit earlier. I think you just have to keep moving forward. You have to keep innovating. You have to keep being better. I look at our partnerships as ways to own spaces that they're not going to be able to get into now. And again, if somebody's looking at us and brand X and online, it may look the same, but if they see that we're working with Harley Davidson and Yeti, that's probably enough to push them in the right direction, right? So when I can find, again, I tell my team this 5 times a week, but it's always audience and authenticity. If we can do something really authentic in front of an audience of scale, I think that helps everything. So I guess that's kind of how I approach those to compete with them. I mean, part of me wants to just run ads against them and bash them, but you can't do that, right? You have to be cool. So that's kind of the hard thing for me is I get emotional because it's my baby. But you just have to be better and be the bigger person, and I think it ends up paying off. People can see that.
You mentioned the importance of crowdfunding correctly, doing it correctly. What do you mean by that? What's your thoughts on that?
So the thing I learned with crowdfunding, which was fascinating the first time, is, these audiences have millions and millions, like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, they have millions of email addresses, and they've got a lot of data behind who's behind those email addresses. If you can get, I think they call it trending on certain platforms, if you can raise 20% of your goal on the first day, you can get thrown into their trending funnels, which then gets you into their emails, which then starts hitting millions of people that you otherwise would never be able to access, right? These are people that are interested in new products and interested in supporting young brands and are going to open that email and look through it. They have really high click rates because they've curated these audiences. So I was able to get on the phone with a couple people from Indiegogo before I started and tried to understand, well, how do we get really successful? How do we have $1 million campaign? And they said, well, if you get to 20% of your goal, then you start trending, and then we'll put you at the top of the web page, and we'll put you, and you start getting all this exposure, and that's really what it comes down to. So, I thought we could sell more than we set as our goal, but we set our goal at a level where I knew we could hit 20% in the first 24 or 36 hours or whatever it was, and that always is changing, but it's something like that. Once we hit that, and they'd be like, hey, congrats, you're trending, you're going to be in an email going out on this day, and man, watching that $ spin on your page because those emails went out was one of my favorite moments in life. I mean, you just have to kind of understand how that machine works and how you get to the top of the page and how you get in the emails, because that's a huge audience you could never have access to otherwise. And if your page is built, which I think is the easy part, you build a good product page and you drive people there, then you can get some really big results.
Any more questions here on the couch?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for coming today.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about mindset in the business world today, and I want to ask you, what motivates you, and what do you use to motivate your employees?
So, good question. We talk about this a lot. I mean, on the bare bones side of it, losing everything I've saved up my entire life is a lot of motivation, right? All the chips are on the table. But that said, before I started Uncharted, I told people the worst job I ever had was working at this fitness app company, and it was the best paying job I ever had. I had a really nice white office in Newport Beach, and I didn't have to work the weekends, and I got paid. And it felt really like I was wasting my life. It just was like there was no meaning behind it. So for me, I learned, and right before that, for the record, I was going to Iraq twice a month, kind of life on the line. We had snipers shoot at us, car bombs knocked me over, and we were putting smiles on people's faces that really needed it. So that was a big contrast for me of like feeling like you're living a fulfilling life and just taking a paycheck. So I knew whatever I was going to do next, like, yeah, I want to be able to afford like heli ski trips and things like that, but I didn't think money was going to be enough. I wanted to leave a legacy, so when I'm gone, I could say, hey man, I left the campfire or the campsite better than I found it. And so for me, having a mission and watching that come to fruition was really powerful. Now, that may not be the same goal as the people that work for me, right? But I think you just gotta, when you're small and you got 6 or 7 employees, you can understand who they are, you can understand what makes them tick, and you can incentivize them based on that. At Uncharted, I mean, we've got dogs in the office. Almost everybody has a dog, and I would say it's a little distracting at times here and there, but it also makes everybody happy, and they don't have to go home and feel like they leaving the dog. I mean, it creates a lot of happiness. People stay later because they don't have to rush home. Little things like that. This summer we did Flex Fridays, so we'd meet on a Thursday, and if everybody was feeling on top of things, they wanted to work from home, because we have a few people that live in Salt Lake that have to drive to Park City every day, and that's a lot of hours every week. Being able to work from home on a Friday, or maybe start your vacation early and just get your work done, went a long ways. We were working events on the weekends, and people had to pick up those. So just respecting the fact that I don't think anybody wants to work 5/7 of their life to have 2/7 off. I think trying to integrate into life and let people enjoy it is really powerful. I mean, the reason I moved to Utah, a big thing was I did not want to be in California. I did not want to be in a little kind of office space somewhere where parking was a pain in the butt, and there was all like, we're in a town now where if it's a powder day, like we'll just go skiing in the morning and come in at 10 and work till 7, or we might go take lunch laps. We'll have a sprint on the trails at lunch and see who's the fastest. And I just think building that kind of camaraderie goes a long ways to everybody having each other's backs and building a team. And that said, I for a long time I didn't have that. I was not doing a good job of that, and I feel like now whether it's I've gotten better at what I'm doing, or I just found the right people that embrace that kind of a mindset, that's powerful. How you scale that to like 100 employees, I don't know. I'm not there yet. I'm not going to pretend I have answers for things that I haven't tried to manage before, but I've always told my team I'd rather be in charge of like a special forces team than an entire army. So that's kind of our goal right now, is to just have people that trust each other, work hard for each other, enjoy hanging out with each other, and kind of just keep that mission at the forefront and reward them accordingly. Yeah.
Right up front here.
So I want to know, and thank you for coming as well. I want to know this. How did you solve your distribution issue? So I'm sitting here thinking you're in the world of MLMs, and you're not taking this on a path of going direct to the consumer through representatives. It seems like for an upgraded, for a high-scale product like yours, that might be a really successful way to go. Why did you avoid that path as opposed to more of a retail path?
Why did I avoid MLMs?
Yeah. Why did you not go direct to the consumer through representatives?
I mean, I think everything's always on the table for what makes the most sense. We started as a direct-to-consumer brand. So we built an online store, and we were driving ads there. And I think that world's changed a lot in the last 5 or 6 years even. But when I started Uncharted, that was the most effective place to be from a margin standpoint, from a targeting standpoint. I mean, it's harder to target people now than it was a year ago, right? And because there's more competition in the space, now ad buy is more expensive. But even 5 years ago, it was much more lucrative to be in that space. And if you could do that well, it just, for me, it cut down on infrastructure and was an easy way to scale. I don't have a lot of experience in MLM. I think the retail thing came about because of all the reasons I said earlier. Like, we wanted exposure at storefronts. We wanted people walking through, and we wanted people to be able to get stuff very quickly. We have affiliate marketing programs. We have ambassadors. We have people that get a commission when they sell. It's not exactly MLM, but I do know for a fact that our highest converting traffic is referrals. And that goes a long ways when you have somebody that you trust and they're like, this is really good, trust me on this, and they will buy it. So we do something similar, but I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, it's probably just something we haven't explored because we started here and went to this, and we're still growing, and maybe that becomes a part of it someday.
All right, and then the follow-up is this, and then I'll leave you alone. But the question that I have is, you're dealing with a product that might be used every 4 years in an emergency product. How are you creating that into an everyday brand?
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest miss when I started this company. I looked at this as a go-to bag versus a go bag. In my life, I've got gear, and I use the flashlight, I use the duct tape, I use the first aid. I'm using it constantly. What I didn't realize was people were going to buy our survival kits, and it was going to be a break glass in case of emergency type product. They didn't even want to open it unless they had an emergency because they wanted it to be perfect and ready for that one time. So from a marketing standpoint, we've worked on, hey, we've got refill kits. Like, hey, you don't want to be the first time you open that to be a big emergency. Use that thing, get comfortable, try to understand it. So we do a lot of messaging around that, but at the same time, we've built products that are much more personal. So it's, we have a hip pack and a dog collar, and we have a little, we call it the triage kit. It's a little first aid and gear repair kit that can go in your bike jersey or chest pocket. These are products you'll use and have in your hands all the time when you're doing stuff. You put it in your dog every day, or the hip pack's on every time you mountain bike or run. So we're trying to create touch points where people are using the products and working through them and getting familiar with our brand. And hopefully if they start using those small first aid kits more frequently, then they're not afraid to get into the big ones, and they know that we can do refill kits, and we're working on subscriptions. So anything that's perishable gets refilled, so people know they're going to use them. And that's something that we're constantly solving for, because I think our repeat customers, if I look last, it's 35 to 40% repeat customers, which I think is a pretty good spot. But big money comes in subscriptions, right? You look at something like coffee, and you know that you have to order every month or every 2 weeks. And trying to incorporate that into what we're doing would be really powerful. So again, I definitely don't have all the answers. I'm at where I'm at, and we're trying to figure this out. But it's a great question because we think about that all the time. How do we get people to use it more frequently?
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Christian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.